at 5:10. All right, so here's the first one. Bob Iger. Paul, who is he?
He is the CEO of Disney. He built him into a powerhouse, and then he retired, and they hired a guy named Bob Chapek, and then Bob Chapek got in a fight with Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, and then he got moved away, and Bob Iger got brought back in.
So, and again, we appreciate all the feedback because there's so many things that can be complicated, and some of this is something I'm learning more and more about when it comes to streaming. I'll give you this example. On streaming, the only thing I watched that is streaming related, and it was, I don't know how many episodes, 8, is Tulsa King with
Stallone.
Sylvester Stallone. It was after watching the series on cable, Yellowstone, which is my favorite series, and that's like 8 episodes as well, Costner, etc. Then after that was over, about a 10-minute break, I would then start with the next episode of Tulsa King, and they kind of were able to go simultaneously. I do watch ESPN Plus. Most of the time, if it's an ESPN Plus, it's on my laptop and or obviously my phone. But I don't really view much when it comes to streaming. So that's from my perspective. Craig and Paul, much younger, get it much better. So Bob Iger, in the sports world, executives are beginning to grapple with the rocketing cost of sports rights with similar implications. ESPN is going through some obviously challenging times, and because of that, of what's happened with linear programming. All right, because of what's happened. And I got a note about that here in a minute. The second part of his quote, I've had long conversations with this ESPN's Jimmy Pitaro, who runs ESPN, and we've got some decisions that we have to make coming up, and we're simply going to have to be more selective. Both of you guys, let's talk about this. There was a time, I don't know, like up until 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, where ESPN and all the networks, they were just throwing money at sports. I mean, it was like massive money. Obviously, yes, the NFL, and no, we know a lot about college football, the playoffs, and the NCAA, but money was just everywhere. And we wondered, is there ever going to be a balloon or something? And that's not really happened. But eventually, you just can't spend all the money because it's not always going to be available.
Well, the problem TV's running into, and you kind of broached it there, Smokey, is that different people consume media in different ways now. And there used to be 2 ways to do it. You either had cable or you didn't. And then when most people got cable, you either got, you paid for different tiers of cable. Well, now there is just a multitude of things available. And if you have something available, you have to put programming on it. So then that creates more competition in the market or necessity for things. And what's happening with ESPN is they're because their subscriptions have gone down, and ESPN Plus hasn't buoyed them as much as I think they thought it would, that people are like, oh, I'll sign up for this because I can watch all my sports. Most people are irritated by ESPN Plus because of its functionality. And so they're in a spot now where, okay, what rights are we going to be buying up? Now, the NBA contract is coming up here soon. There are reports that NBC is going to get in on bidding on that, among other people. If ESPN lets the NBA go, that means that's probably good news for a league like the Pac-12. Or if ESPN decides that the NBA is more important to have than more college athletics, which they already have a ton of, then that's bad news for the Pac-12 because that would be where some of that money would go. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of stuff that ESPN lets go in the next few years and focuses on what really gets your ratings. Now, college football does get ratings for ESPN. The NBA...
Is it about ratings or subscriptions?
Well, I mean, if you have ratings on ESPN, then you already have subscriptions.
Okay.
So you can't get them. If you don't have ESPN, then you don't get it. So those kind of go hand in hand. And things will keep the subscriptions up. They'll get those ratings. So college football is probably one of those things. But what else is going to really help you? And they're going to have to make some decisions. Some stuff that we watch on ESPN all the time will probably be gone and off into different spaces. And I don't know if that's good or bad news for the Pac-12. It might be good news because the NBA is much bigger than the Pac-12 would be, but at the end of it, like, does that help or hurt, or does that just mean they're cutting where they can cut?
There's absolutely zero chance in this world that they would select Pac-12 football over NBA basketball, ESPN in particular. There's no way. I don't care how much of a price discount it is, and the NBA deal that's coming up is going to be in the billions. But I think that the people in charge of these networks have been figuring that now for the last few years in their projections. They've known that was going to go up. Everything else might be going down or going away, but the NBA is only going up. NFL is only going up. So people who are in the business have known for a little while that the NBA price tag was probably going to be pretty hefty when it arrived. So I think they've been planning accordingly. Now, you may ask, like, well, what does that mean for Turner? Well, Turner's whole identity is NBA basketball, not anything else. No matter what they've tried with the NHL or what have you, we know TNT because of the NBA. And the NBA alone, and you might want to sprinkle in some baseball here, but it's an NBA channel. They're not going to pivot away from that, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, I think the word you said balloon, I think the word you're looking for is bubble.
Bubble is a better word, yes.
There's a streaming bubble because everybody went and spent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to be Netflix or to be better than Netflix, and let's have 100 original TV shows, and let's bring our own studios into the fold, and let's make our own movies, and let's pay hundreds of millions of dollars to well-known actors to create series for us. And, like, I don't know how many people watch Apple TV. I know people have it. I have it. But I know far less people that have that than most any other thing. And yet I know that Apple TV has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on shows that not a ton of people apparently even watch. And so a lot of studios have just sunk money into creating, and I think they now realize that, one, we are going through a recession. We're not all sitting at home anymore. And so the stuff that made sense like 2.5, 3 years ago doesn't make as much sense now. And so I don't know how much, like, the whole streaming giants and they're going to go grab this and grab that. I think everybody's, like, starting to hit the brakes, like Disney, ABC, ESPN. Not necessarily in every area, but, yeah, certainly in some areas there are going to be some cutbacks because they just can't all afford to keep spending willy-nilly like they did for such a stretch run. So, yeah, in some areas there's going to have to be, okay, we're not going to spend quite this much money on this particular item. And in the case of college football, it does seem like there's a game of musical chairs going on. And Brett Yormark of the Big 12 went and grabbed a chair about a year early, foreseeing that, hey, one, there's not going to be tons and tons of SEC Big Ten money flowing around for the rest of us. Two, there's only a limited amount of parking spaces left. So we better go grab our parking space while we still have it. And the Pac-12 is now finding out, oh, wow, there's not every dealer, every channel, every network lining up for this remaining amount of college football. Some of them aren't even interested. Like, apparently a couple of them today that we found out aren't interested or have ended negotiations. So, yeah, there's not quite the marketplace that there was even a year or two ago. And I don't know what that means for the future and all that. I'm not worried about the NBA. I'm not worried about the NFL, SEC, Big Ten, all that. But if you are somebody who's not just that guaranteed eyeball drawer night in, night out, then, yeah, you're probably looking at a situation where the money's a little tighter or it's not quite what you thought it might have been 2 years ago when you were projecting out.
Well, and this was something Brett McMurphy, about 3 hours ago, MSN also had this. Paul, you handed this to me. CBS Sports and Turner reportedly back out of Pac-12 media rights negotiations. I got to be honest with you, I thought they already had. I thought it was basically down to ESPN and streaming, but this was a story days after releasing a United statement that expressed confidence in the 10 teams sticking together and ability to find a media rights partner. Brett McMurphy reporting that CBS and Turner are currently no longer involved in the Pac-12's media rights negotiation. Let me reiterate, I already thought they were basically out. Maybe there was still hope there, but I thought they were out, and it comes down to ESPN, how much they want to bite off, and then also whatever they do with streaming. Now, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if this is good news or bad news for the Pac-12. I mean, it on the surface, it doesn't look good because, you know, that's one less partner. But I don't really know how much CBS was going to be involved in the first place or what they were really going to be involved in. Yeah, I'm sure that they were in it, and I'm sure that there was some interest. But when it comes down to it, if you look at CBS's overall football strategy for the last couple of years, it's not been to put on 3 or 4 games. It's been to put on 1 or 2. And that's what they're doing now they're going to have, you know, some Big Ten games there on CBS. So I don't know if because adding another conference into that would kind of change everything that they've been doing for a long time. And CBS, If you look at every network and everything that they've done, CBS is by far the easiest to figure. They don't have a lot of shows that get canceled because they know exactly what people like. If they have a show that gets canceled, then they just put NCIS in front of a city, and then they have that show. Sports-wise, they have the NFL, they've got the SEC and now the Big Ten, swapping those out, and they've got the NCAA basketball tournament, which is partnered with Turner. Streaming is Paramount Plus, and that's what they have. And it's kind of straightforward. So they're the easiest ones to figure. So I just never thought the Pac-12 really fit too much into their plans, because it would have been kind of not every week, just based on if there's a good Pac-12 game at 3:30 that's a noon kick there, they might have picked it up. But I just don't think that it was ever really working for them.
Yeah, the Pac and CBS, I never considered that to be realistic for some of the reasons Paul's outlining there. I mean, what are you going to throw what kickoff are you going to have on CBS for the late West Coast game? Like, where is that going to fit into the schedule? Like, were they going to play at 10 a.m. for your afternoon game? I mean, it just seems like it would be logistically kind of an issue, and I just don't think there's the drawing power. I mean, what are you signing up for? I mean, I'm not saying, and look, I'm not for Pac-12, like, Big 12 home. Like, I'm not saying that they would draw well either. I never thought CBS would be that interested in the Big 12. I never thought they'd be that interested in the Pac-12. I think for a brand like that, it's like SEC or Big 10 are probably bust for some of these. And that's part two of these streaming cutbacks is that, Time Warner, for example, they're not really in a position to go spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a property that might not give them a great return on investment. They're losing money, gobs of money. They're cutting people left and right. You're seeing that across the industry. So now's not the time to just go plop, this ridiculous figure in front of just whoever because, it's live sports. I mean, it's live sports is coveted, but it's not that coveted. It's got to make sense eventually. I never really considered CBS or Turner, for that matter, to be all that serious of players. And I think, one other part of this is we have to keep reminding ourselves that USC and UCLA are not a part of this deal. I mean, this is not going to involve them. So now you are looking at, like we always talk about Oregon, Washington. Those are your two biggest brands. And that might sound super appealing to fantasy booker me coming up with what would the coolest tournament look like with college football teams, like Oregon versus, Alabama, but for viewers, is Oregon Cal pulling you in that big spot that you'd have for Pac-12 football? I don't know that it is, and I don't know that you have a lot of options because, as I believe it was Andrew Marchand or his partner may have mentioned on their podcast, this whole negotiating, it's about one game. This isn't like we'll play 4 of your games all day long. This is about like the prime game that you were going to have for Amazon Prime. I should clarify that. On the Amazon Prime side of things, what Marchand and as partner who
John Alran.
Yeah, Alran were talking about was the Amazon thing's about one game. It's not about we're going to carry the Pac-12 conference and you tune in. Now, maybe it could eventually turn into that, but based on what he was saying, this is like your game of the week is on Amazon, like they do the one game of the week in the NFL. And quite frankly, if you eliminate the LA schools, how attractive is that week after week after week? Oregon, Washington would be great, but beyond that, Oregon, Utah would be cool. But 14 weeks, 15 weeks of that, you're kind of limited all of a sudden. And I think that probably came into play somewhat as well.
All right, so Brett Yormark, Big 12